This NFL update sponsored by the Fantasy Sports Combine. This is an interesting story to me, Wood. I wanted to bring this up for the last week.
Okay.
The Dallas Cowboys, they're putting together a team of questionable character and questionable characters. Think about it. They drafted Randy Gregory, a problem child. They signed Lael Collins, who we think was a problem child. He didn't get drafted because of it.
Well, we don't know.
They signed Greg Hardy, who got in trouble with the law, and he's suspended for the first 10 games of the upcoming season. And they already had, Des Bryant, who's a problem child of his own accord.
He's a diva.
But the roster is filled with guys like that. Michael Irvin, of all people, the Hall of Fame wide receiver who played for Dallas. Michael Irvin says he wants to help. He says he wants to be a resource, at least for Randy Gregory. Is this smart? Should the Cowboys allow Michael Irvin to mentor Randy Gregory and any other of these troubled players?
Sure.
And do we need to remind people about Michael Irvin's own history?
I know, but Michael Irvin finally grew up, and he's on TV, and he had caused team problems. You haven't heard any ugly problems about Michael Irvin since he's kind of retired.
Nah, he's just got a mouth on him still. That's all.
You say they're filled. Their roster's still 85, 90%, more than 90% of people that you would consider somewhat good people.
That's a lot of troubled guys. And big trouble, too.
You spend a lot of time with your friend Mike Shanahan, and I'm not making fun of that. Why don't you ask him and come back and report about what he felt like was the percentage of bad people you could have in the locker room? And I remember him saying to me that 3 was a number, 3 or 4.
Yeah.
And so ask him if his memory is like mine.
Okay.
Because remember when they brought in Dale Carter from Kansas City, who was a trouble child.
Bad guy.
And they had a couple other guys. Remember there was
Daryl Gardner.
Daryl Gardner.
He was a problem.
That's who I was going for.
Yeah.
That the feeling was, as I remember conversations with coaches and general managers over the years, is if you could contain one corner of the locker room, that they wouldn't infect the rest of the locker room. That you could have 3 or 4 or 5 guys. That when you went past that 3 or 4 or 5 and you had 8 or 9, then you had a problem because they would overwhelm the rest of the locker room. Well, kind of look at the Miami Dolphins a couple of years ago. They kind of fly in the face of that. There was 1 or 2 guys picking on another offensive lineman, and that just exploded the whole locker room.
The Richie Incognito thing.
So I would wonder, Mike, having been away from the game now a little bit and having coached somewhere else, if he still feels like, and we'd love to get him on someday, and he'll come on, I'm sure, that if he still feels like, you can have 3 or 4 bad apples, and it doesn't ruin an entire crate.
It's tough. When you've got 53 guys in the locker room and then another 10 guys on the practice squad, you're going to have some bad apples. It's inevitable. And every single team has 1, 2, 3, 4 of those guys. But in the Dallas case, it seems to be of a greater magnitude.
Well,
not just the fact they're trouble, but the magnitude of their troubles.
It's a franchise history.
Well, yeah, and Michael Irvin is included in that history. I mean, Michael Irvin is the guy who was arrested numerous times for drug charges and had the White House with a few other Dallas Cowboys where they treated it like a fraternity house. None of their girlfriends or spouses knew about it. And they did all kinds of things.
Prostitutes and all sorts of other
things. I don't know if you remember, Michael Irvin at one time was arrested for cocaine possession, and while they were arresting him, there were strippers hovering over him doing all sorts of things. It was very sordid. So do I want Michael Irvin as a mentor for my troubled players? Absolutely
not. If you're
not.
the Cowboys, why not?
Yeah, absolutely not.
So I would just say, because you and I are not invited to address the assemblage of thousands of people who are going to the combine draft, kind of fantasy draft assistance league in Las Vegas, I want to give you and all the other fantasy players, because as Bill pointed out, I don't do fantasy, that...
advice? You want to give me some advice?
Yeah. Don't take a troubled player. If you think of a troubled player, don't put him on your fantasy team.
That's true.
Try to avoid. And my daughter didn't listen to me. She's in a fantasy football league every year. The team she picks is guys who have felonies on their record.
That's how
That's
she
what
does
she
it?
does it every
That's
year.
funny.
So
All right.
she came to me and said, Dad, do you have a kicker? I don't have any kickers. And I said, Matt Prater. So
There you go.
she came
Good
to me and
chance
said,
of suspension there.
I need a new quarterback. My quarterback, I said, Michael Vick. Hey, hello.
That NFL update was sponsored by the aforementioned Fantasy Sports Combine. The Fantasy Sports Combine is the ultimate experience if you're a serious fantasy football player, and it's coming this summer at the Wynn Las Vegas. It's put together by a bunch of Denver people. It's July 17th to the 19th in Vegas at the Wynn, and you're not going to believe the lineup of people that are going to be attending to help you draft your fantasy team. You're going to get advice from people like Matthew Berry, the fantasy sports guru at ESPN, Adam Schefter, nobody knows the NFL better than Adam, Brandon Marshall, the guy who used to play wide receiver here, he's going to be there, Mike Shanahan, Mike Ditka, many, many other big-name football people and broadcasters who know the game. You can get an edge for your fantasy football team. Get your tickets today at fantasysportscombine.com. It's going to be a blast. fantasysportscombine.com.